You're lucky to have married my son. Don't take advantage of the situation. Make sure to serve us well." I could almost hear the sneering sound effect as Amelia smiled with an ill-intentioned grin. Knowing that $15,000 was deposited monthly into our joint account, she repeatedly indulged in extravagant shopping. And the words she threw at me were what she just said. What a patronizing way to speak. I took a deep breath and said, "I regret it." Amelia's eyes widened as she looked at me in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" I can't understand why Amelia believed she could freely use the $15,000 without any doubt. Actually, about that $15,000. The next moment, Amelia's expression crumbled, realizing an unimaginable truth. My name is Emily Austin. I work as a freelance designer from home, while living with Amelia, whom I despise. I'm fed up with my days filled with sighs, regretting the shallow actions of my past self that led to this situation. The turning point of my life came a year and a half ago when I met my husband, Mark. Having just turned 33, I was feeling anxious about not having had a single boyfriend. Everyone around me was getting married, and some friends who had early pregnancies and births now had children in junior high school. Out of a sense of urgency, I ended up attending a group blind date that I would normally refuse. And that's where I met Mark. While he wasn't particularly handsome, he was very considerate and polite in his interactions with women. I naturally found myself drawn to those qualities. It seemed Mark was also interested in me, as he asked to exchange contact information just before the group date ended. Having no particular reason to refuse, I agreed, and from then on, we began meeting just the two of us. And 6 months after we met, we started dating with the premise of marriage. A few months later, we got married. Up until that point, things were going well. I felt like I was at the pinnacle of my life, finally feeling I had achieved a normal level of happiness. But hell came suddenly.
My mom's been living alone back in my hometown, but she's getting old, so we've decided to live together.
And that's news to me. I couldn't help but argue back. Wait a minute, how could you decide something so important on your own? Are you ignoring my wishes? In your hometown, isn't it? We were living in New York. I was born and raised in New York, but Mark was from the Midwest. It's not that I didn't want to go to his hometown, but it was shocking to be completely ignored and pushed to move suddenly and live together. Mark seemed annoyed, furrowing his brow.
What, do you hate the idea of living with my mom that much? Oh, I get it. You don't like my mom, huh?
The kind Mark I once knew was gone, and after we got married, he suddenly changed, becoming almost like a different person. But it wasn't that. Mark was probably always like this. He just pretended to be someone else to get married. And I was fooled by that. No, it's not like I dislike your mom. Even though I said that, I had a bit of a dislike toward Amelia. When we visited her to introduce ourselves for the wedding, she looked at me and sneered. "Oh, I heard you're from the city, but you look more like a country bumpkin than I thought. So you're a designer? Not bad, but not impressive either. Everything about you is just so-so. Frankly, you're not a good match for my son, Mark." It's not easy to just brush off some comments with a simple "is that so?" Only someone with a steel mentality could do that. Because of such incidents, I wanted to limit my interactions with Amelia as much as possible. But for Mark, my internal struggles didn't matter at all. To him, I wasn't treated as a beloved wife, but rather more like a convenient housekeeper. In the end, my opinions were never heard, and we ended up moving to Mark's hometown in the Midwest. I suddenly started living with Amelia in an unfamiliar place, facing immense stress. However, Mark didn't consider my feelings at all and said something unbelievable.
Starting next Monday, I'll be on an overseas assignment. I probably won't be back for a while. Regarding living expenses, I'll transfer money to my mom's account, so manage it together.
This happened just a week after we started living here. Shocked by the sudden announcement, I hesitantly spoke. "Oh, wait a minute. We've only just started living here a week ago, and now you're going overseas next week? This isn't something you decided just yesterday. Why are you telling me this now?"
If I had told you earlier, you would have run away.
I wondered why I ever married such a man. While I was driven by self-blame, Mark left. Now I had to live with Amelia, whose first impression was the worst, just the two of us. Moreover, Mark said he would send money directly to Amelia's account instead of mine. That's just unbelievable, to say the least. Feeling helpless, I stared out the window, watching Amelia chat happily with the neighbors. 2 weeks had passed since Mark left, and during that time my mental state deteriorated to the point where I couldn't even focus on work. The reason was that there was something constantly getting in my way. After a while, I heard the sound of the front door opening and footsteps coming up the stairs. Then, without knocking, the door flew open. Standing there was none other than Amelia. "Oh, are you hiding in your room again, playing on your computer? You say it's work, but can you really make money doing that? Honestly, Mark said he caught a convenient woman, but when you open the lid, this is what you get? At least it would have been nice if you were pretty." Amelia's daily routine was to torment her daughter-in-law. She divorced a long time ago and apparently hasn't been in contact since. As a housewife with no hobbies except supporting her favorite idols, tormenting me was her way of killing time. She would often come and say things like she had been talking to a neighbor earlier. You know, the wife over there is amazing. She's a doctor. Despite her hard work, she recently opened her own clinic nearby. If you're lucky, you might end up going there too. That is, if Mark doesn't abandon you first. Satisfied, she left the room after saying that, only to come back 2 hours later to spew more insults. I sighed deeply, having had enough. If I tried to work at a cafe to get away from it all, she'd scold me for wasting money and being indulgent. That's why when I stayed home, she'd call me a shut-in and a bum, chipping away at my mental state. My patience was at its limit. Even though I wanted a divorce, there was nothing I could do while Mark was overseas. Before marriage, Mark had kept his true nature thoroughly hidden. Without a full investigation, I couldn't have seen his true self. So in the end, I was deceived. My empty words echoed through the quiet room. Letting out yet another sigh, I stared at the bank book Amelia had given me for the joint account. Are we supposed to live on this amount of money? My words went unheard, fading into the air. One day, Amelia ordered me to go shopping, so I headed to a supermarket about a 30-minute walk away. She said using the car would waste gas, and when I asked for a bike, she replied that it was too extravagant for a daughter-in-law to want. I wondered what era her mindset was stuck in as I walked. Suddenly, a middle-aged man walking in front of me collapsed to the ground as if pulled by gravity. Without thinking, I rushed to his side. Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me? Are you alright? I shouted loudly while shaking his shoulder, and the man opened his eyes slightly, groaning, but he seemed too dazed to answer my questions. Realizing it was an emergency, I immediately called for an ambulance. I moved him to a safe place and instructed a passerby who helped me. I performed CPR while waiting for the ambulance, which arrived in 6 minutes. I managed to hand the man over to the paramedics safely. I also got into the ambulance with him, being the first on the scene and needing to report the situation and the resuscitation steps to the medical staff. The man was taken to the hospital and immediately underwent emergency surgery. A few hours later, I was relieved to hear that he had regained consciousness. When I visited his private room, he looked at me with a kind expression.
I'm alive thanks to you and your CPR.
Apparently, he had heard everything from the nurses. I just did what anyone should do. It wasn't something to be thanked for. I had some experience with CPR, and luckily, many people helped out because of the location. It wasn't just me who saved you. He smiled gently as I humbly spoke.
No, it's rare to act so quickly, and I was a complete stranger to you, yet you helped me. I'm truly grateful. Could you at least tell me your name?
I wanted to say it wasn't worth mentioning, but it felt out of character, so I told him my name. Hearing my surname, his eyes widened.
Could it be... Are you...
Surprised by the unexpected encounter, I widened my eyes too. We exchanged contact information before I left the hospital. He insisted on thanking me somehow, and since he wouldn't take no for an answer, I gave him my phone number. Later that evening, I remembered I was supposed to go shopping, so I hurried to run and get the things I was told to buy. When I got home, I was met by Amelia, looking like she was ready to explode. Where have you been wandering until this late? You can't even do a simple shopping task right. What a useless daughter-in-law. If you're given an order, you should follow it properly. She ordered me to make dinner right away. It started again. When Amelia was in a bad mood, she would hurl insults at me and make me cook, only to throw the food away. That day too, she poured the food I had made down the drain. Who would eat such ugly-looking food? And now the sink is clogged. Clean it up right away. She then casually ordered some expensive sushi, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and made me pay for it. What a troublesome Amelia. I held my head in my hands. The next day, I received a call from my husband, Mark.
Mom told me you've been doing awful things to her.
What are you talking about? Why would I do anything to her? But Mark didn't listen to anything I said and instead began to blame me based on what his mother had told him.
You're not even cooking properly, not cleaning, not even shopping right. Mom says you're adding to her burden, and it's becoming a problem.
For a moment, I thought Amelia was describing herself, but that wasn't it. She was only telling Mark what suited her. And I realized after marriage that Mark was a typical only child who adored his mother. He had a troublesome tendency to believe whatever his beloved mother said over my words. Instinctively, I knew that whatever I said now wouldn't reach him. As expected, before I could say anything, Mark continued.
I don't care about my love life or anything like that. As long as I have Mom, that's enough. But I can't handle everything on my own, so you married me to fill that gap. So do your duty as a wife, understand? That is the one thing you must absolutely do.
With that, Mark abruptly hung up the phone. The machine tone announcing the end of the call sounded unusually loud in my ear. Amelia, who must have been secretly listening, came out and opened her mouth with a sneering smile. Oh dear, you got a scolding from Mark? Well, it's all your fault. You're such a terrible daughter-in-law, not even doing the bare minimum, and being defiant towards me. I only told Mark because of that. I didn't ask him to scold you, but if that's what happened, then you should thoroughly reflect on yourself, Emily. Never defy my orders again. She gave her final warning in a low, crawling voice. Yes, understood. I had no choice but to say that. After Amelia left, a tear ran down my cheek. I had tried to act strong, but my heart had long reached its limit. That confrontation had been the last straw, and my emotions overflowed, unable to stop. As I sobbed quietly, my phone rang, bringing me back to reality. I thought it might be Mark again, but the caller ID said Robert. It was the middle-aged man who had collapsed on the street. I quickly answered the phone, and after a brief hesitation, he asked me,
Were you crying?
My parents had passed away a few years ago, and I found myself overlapping Robert's image with that of my kind, reliable father, making me cry even more.
Bad timing, it seems. I was calling regarding the other day's matter.
No, it's fine. Right now, I'd rather talk to someone than be alone. Thinking that, I responded, and Robert continued speaking hesitantly.
About that matter, it's been completed, so please check it.
Huh? I thought that was a joke.
After saving my life and learning your suffering because of those two, I couldn't just stand by. Please use it without hesitation.
After hanging up, I checked on what Robert had mentioned. Realizing it was real, I was left speechless. But someone took this as a good thing. A few days later, I was at the bank's ATM corner with my passbook. When I tried to withdraw living expenses, an error occurred. The balance was insufficient. When I checked, there were only a few $100s left. Upon closer inspection, I saw a trace of money being withdrawn a few days earlier. It was done using a cash card, so it was undoubtedly Amelia's doing. I hurried back home, but Amelia wasn't there. After waiting for a while, she returned, carrying a bunch of shopping bags. I finally got the goods I wanted. I also bought some brand-name clothes. After all, having a high-earning, reliable son is the best, she said with a pleased expression as she entered the living room. Oh, you were here, Emily. As soon as she saw me, her mood turned sour. I asked what all those shopping bags were. She answered that they were merchandise of a male idol she had been supporting for some time and foreign brand items. Why did you do that? Why do you care, Emily? I used Mark's money so I don't have to explain myself to you. So it was you who withdrew almost all the money from the joint account, wasn't it? Amelia laughed arrogantly. Well, I thought I'd better withdraw it before you did. I was planning to complain to Mark soon. He's quite strict about money matters, but I kept quiet until now. I knew my feelings would get across eventually. I never thought there would be $15,000 deposited. Checking the balance with a cash card every day paid off. Lately, Amelia often went out for short periods. I never thought she was checking the balance with the cash card. She must have been desperate for money. From here, Amelia's indulgent lifestyle began. Every month on the 15th, $15,000 was deposited, and she would immediately withdraw it to waste on extravagant purchases. She started living a lavish lifestyle. Recently, she had been going out more often at night, dressed in light clothing that young women in their 20s would wear, with dark red lipstick. She would come back late, usually around midnight, looking quite satisfied. This continued for 3 months until Amelia suddenly said something shocking. You're lucky to have married my son. Since he went overseas, he's been making a lot of money. Oh, it must be because of how well I raised him. Lately, Emily, you haven't been arguing unnecessarily, and it's been so easy to live. As a housekeeper, you're not enough, but considering you're free, that's good enough. Emily, you must continue to serve us. That's your purpose in life. Who does she think she is? Some cult leader? My purpose in life shouldn't be something Amelia decides. I was trembling with anger, but calmed myself down, knowing that the time wasn't right yet. Amelia had no idea what was about to happen, and her $15,000 lifestyle continued for a while. And one day, the music stopped. Did you enjoy yourself, Amelia? I suddenly asked, and Amelia looked at me blankly. What are you talking about? You spent nearly $100,000 in total, haven't you? How was that dreamlike lifestyle? Did you honestly think it would last forever? My strange question deepened the frown on Amelia's face. I have no idea what you're talking about. Instead, how could you still act like this after marrying my son? There's no man as wonderful as Mark. Hearing his mother say that made me feel a chill. Well, it's time to teach her a lesson in reality. I started crying and began to speak like an actress. Oh, I really regret it. Why did I ever marry Mark? If I had married him, I wouldn't be feeling this miserable. At that moment, Amelia's eyebrows twitched. What? Are you dissatisfied? I will never allow a divorce between Mark and you. Emily, you're a convenient daughter-in-law for us, so you can't escape. I don't mind going to court, but that would only be if you have the means to pay for the exorbitant costs. She sounded so confident, but her expression froze the next moment. You and your son had a combined debt of $90,000, didn't you? But thanks to Robert, it's all sorted now. How do you know that? Wait, how do you know about my ex-husband, Robert? Amelia began to look anxious, something I'd never seen before. She seemed shocked to learn that I was in contact with Robert, Mark's father, and her ex-husband. I explained how I helped a man who collapsed in front of me while I was shopping. That man turned out to be Robert. He recognized my surname and realized I was married to Mark, his son. From there, things moved quickly. Robert knew I was married to his son, Mark. I also never expected the man I helped to be Mark's father. But perhaps it was fate's trickery. After being used and thrown into hell, fate brought me a savior. On that day, Robert proposed a plan to repay his gratitude for saving his life.
So you married Mark, and he has a debt of $40,000, while she has a debt of $50,000, totaling $90,000.
They had kept their debts hidden from each other. Mark has $40,000 in debt from gambling and credit card bills, while she borrowed $50,000 for her idol addiction. I discovered this through letters and reminder notices that came to the house. I didn't open them, but I hired a detective agency with my savings from when I was single to investigate their financial situation. I regretted not doing this before marriage, but I'm glad I did it now. I used the little money Mark sent me to gradually pay off the debts bit by bit. But as it became increasingly difficult to cover even living expenses with Amelia here, I thought about what to do. That's when I met Robert. And Robert had been transferring $14,000 every month to Amelia's account. He said it was his limit. He asked me to manage the repayment somehow. If he had sent it to Emily's account, there would have been gift tax issues, so he deliberately sent it to his ex-wife's account. He said he would clearly write on the memo line that it was for debt repayment, which could serve as proof. And he said once the total debt of $90,000 was completely repaid, the plan would be put into action. At first, Robert only sent $40,000, but saying he had a bit more flexibility, he managed to send the full $90,000 in about 4 months. Amelia, oblivious to all this, spent all the money meant for debt repayment. She crumpled to the floor, trembling. That can't be! You tricked me! Let me ask you, did you think it was okay to use a large sum of money deposited every month without any suspicion? For example, using money you knew was mistakenly deposited can be considered a crime, and there are cases where people have been arrested. As I said this, Amelia fell silent. She seemed to have realized something, and suddenly raised her head, whispering softly. Wait, if that man has been sending $14,000 every month, then the remaining $1,000 is from Mark, isn't it? To me, it seemed like she had only just realized this. Yes, that's right, and Mark's story about being overseas for work is a complete lie. I've already called him over here, so he should be arriving any minute now. At the same time I said that, I heard the front door open. Entering the house was Mark, looking pale and slightly trembling, accompanied by an angry Robert. This man has been giving only $1,000 a month to me and Amelia while giving $2,000 to his mistress for living expenses. The investigation didn't just reveal the debts. It also uncovered the fact that Mark's overseas work story was a lie and that he was actually living with a mistress. Mark knelt down on the spot, his voice shaking as he apologized to me.
I'm sorry I made a little mistake, so please forgive me regarding the alimony. You think you can be forgiven just like that? You're such a shallow person. It's embarrassing to think I raised someone like you. Mark's father, Robert, was shouting at him, seeing his son after what must have been a long time. Amelia, witnessing the scene, could only watch in fear, trembling. Emily saved my life, so I wanted to repay her by freeing her from this nightmare. That's why I sent a total of $90,000, but it seems she used it all. Her reckless spending habits are still the same. That was one of the reasons I divorced her. Or have you forgotten? Amelia had no words to defend herself, her head lowered, mumbling excuses.
But I couldn't help it. What's wrong with spending the money that comes in?
Using money without understanding its source is never a good idea. As I said earlier, if it turns out to be someone else's money, and you're asked to return it but can't, you can be held accountable. That's a form of fraud. If you knowingly used it, you could be arrested. You've got what it takes to be a criminal, don't you?
As he snorted and said that, Amelia glared at me. This was probably the maximum resistance she could muster. But it didn't affect me at all. Normally, if a large sum of $15,000 is deposited, it would arouse suspicion. But she squandered it without question, proving her lack of common sense. Anyway, Robert and Mark had come in together, and now Mark was in a tight spot, realizing he was exposed for both infidelity and debt. His face turned pale, and he looked as though his soul had left his body. Looking at both of them, Robert sighed deeply. As a former husband and a father, I've done what I should.
The $90,000 was for them to resolve their debt, so they should handle the rest on their own. And since I've fulfilled my responsibility, Mark, you are now obliged to release Emily immediately. You must pay the alimony for your infidelity right here and now. You have no right to refuse.
Hearing this from Robert, Mark was flustered. Realizing that his debt would only increase if he didn't act now, he tried to avoid this at all costs.
Dad, come on. As my father, you should pay the alimony for me. I still have a lot of debt, and my girlfriend is pregnant, so I can't afford to spend money on this.
Hearing this made me snap, not Robert. While I was suffering, barely getting by, cutting into my savings, you were getting another woman pregnant, and now you're saying you can't afford to pay because money is important? And you think Robert, as your father, should pay? How pathetic. I was ashamed of my past self for even liking a man like this for a second. As I said this, Mark's face turned bright red, like steam was coming out of his head.
Well, it's your fault for being fooled. She's younger and prettier and got pregnant right away. You're less than a housekeeper to me. Sue me for fraud if you want.
At that moment, a beep sounded in the room, the sound of a recording device. Good, I got your confession that you deceived me, recorded perfectly. Now I can demand additional compensation for the insult on top of the alimony for your infidelity. Be prepared. Realizing he had dug his own grave, Mark hurriedly tried to deny it, but it was too late.
Did you forget what I do for a living? I'm a lawyer. As for Emily's case, I've promised to handle it for free. Mark, get ready.
At that moment, the defeat of Amelia and Mark was decided. After that, with Robert's full cooperation, the divorce was quickly finalized. We demanded and received full alimony payments from both Amelia and Mark in a lump sum. Naturally, they ended up taking on more debt, leading to a life in misery. They could no longer borrow from regular financial institutions, so they turned to dubious lenders. As for Mark, his life became increasingly difficult, and he began borrowing money from friends under various pretenses. His actions of borrowing money under false pretenses quickly became a problem, and he faced a group lawsuit demanding repayment. This also exposed his affair to his girlfriend. His girlfriend, who was also deceived into thinking he was single, was just as much a victim as I was. And with her being pregnant, Mark's actions were even more unforgivable. He found himself surrounded on all sides. Even his beloved mother, Amelia, abandoned him.
I'm doing my best to take care of myself, so I can't take care of Mark too.
This must have shocked Mark, who had always thought he was doing everything for his mother. He had been abandoned the moment he was no longer needed. Finally forced to face reality, Mark now works tirelessly from morning till night to make amends for his wrongs. Of course, he broke up with his girlfriend and is now also paying child support, as well as repaying his friends with interest. As for Amelia, it seems she was going out at night to visit host clubs, spending about $100,000 on one particular host, relying on the mysterious $15,000 that was coming in every month. Her current whereabouts are unknown. Having received $90,000 without reporting it, she's now facing possible arrest for tax evasion. Rumors say she was called out by the host's establishment and sent overseas, but there are various speculations. But from my perspective, it's all in the past. I don't care about the end of a stranger. I hope she suffers and atones as much as possible. That's all there is to it. As for me, I'm back in New York living a peaceful life alone. I've made designing a side job and returned to my work as a nurse. One reason I had trouble meeting people was because of the demanding and regular nature of nursing. But now, having experienced marriage once, I've had enough. I decided to go back to being a nurse. But that's not all. After saving Robert that day, I strongly felt I wanted to be involved in nursing again. I still enjoy design, so I'm continuing that work on the side. This current environment is ideal for me. Occasionally, I still interact with Robert, and he shared an interesting story.
My divorce with my ex-wife was not just due to her spending habits, but also her infidelity. Mark is not my biological son. I'm taking steps to ensure he doesn't inherit a single cent from my estate.
Hearing that, I laughed, finally feeling certain of my victory.